Hi, and welcome to the Crossroads live webinar about the elephant in the room, how not to be a donkey when talking about politics with your family. That's right. Today, we're going to tackle the topic of how to talk about politics around the Thanksgiving table as we get ready for the election and all that. And with me today, I'll let them introduce themselves. Got two of our therapists.
I'm Brad Bernstein. I am one of the therapists at Crossroads. I have been with Crossroads for maybe a year and a half or so, and I work mostly with adolescents and young adults.
Hi, I'm Dave Gold. I'm a psychologist here at Crossroads. I'm the old man in the group. I've been here since 1995. And I just want you all to know that Matt, who introduced us, is the one who came up with the title for this talk.
You're welcome for that. Clearly, we're not going to have the problem of talking over each other today. We seem to be too nice for that. And we obviously practiced all of our body content and not our introductions. So this will get better as we go on. But I do have a mute button for each of you guys in case I need it. So don't get out of hand. We're going to start with a fun little exercise, though. Real important question. I want to know, what kind of milkshakes do you guys prefer?
There's really only one milkshake that's an intelligent choice, okay? There's only one. Any other choice is stupid. It's strawberry.
Really? Who drinks strawberry milkshakes? The obvious choice is chocolate.
You know, I got to go with Brad on this one. Who puts fruit in a milkshake? Milkshakes are supposed to be bad for you.
Smoothie.
All of you chocolate eaters are all the same. You're so focused just on chocolate. That's all you want to talk about. That's all you want to eat. You're closed-minded. You're narrow-minded. You're all the same.
That's because chocolate's the best.
It's the best, exactly.
And you're competitive, too. I can't believe this.
Well, if that's not the pot calling the kettle black, are you feeling ganged up on yet?
I haven't even started.
Well, I don't really care to hear anything you have to say. I mean, there's only one right answer here.
Obviously, we're trying to illustrate a couple of points in this argument. This is what not to do. Don't let this happen to you. For the rest of the evening, we're going to go through a little bit of what's going to be more helpful and the way we should talk about things. Okay? So let me start.
With that in mind, what would you guys say are the main goals you should have when you talk to family about politics?
I think there are three main goals, okay? The first goal is you're not there to prove someone wrong. This isn't about right and wrong, who's smarter, who's not smarter. The goal is not to prove who's wrong. Rather, the goals are to try to find common ground. Okay. Even when people disagree on, broad brushstrokes, often there is common ground to find in, small little specifics. Okay. If we acknowledge that, if we're looking for that, the other person treats us very differently. Even if you can't find common ground, a second goal could be to get to the point where that's where we disagree. You look at it this way, I look at it this way. That's okay. We can disagree on that. And then the third one is your ulterior motive is to use this disagreement to strengthen the relationship. Okay? It means a lot if I sit here and say to Brad, after we've been going at each other, you know something? You made some good points. I like how you came back at me. It is very clear how much you've read about this stuff, how much you care about this stuff. I appreciate it. It means a lot when you can kind of spar with each other a little bit, but you come back in a way that's positive, that's supportive, and that can strengthen the relationship. Okay.
I think your point about your third point, especially to me, hits home. That priority really should be, especially around family gatherings, strengthening the relationship, right? That's what those times are about.
Right.
And if we make that the number one priority, then I think those other two are going to fall in line.
Remember, the topic is talking about politics within your family. Okay, if it's not a family member, if it's an academic setting, if it's someplace else, you know, that might not be the goal, and that's okay. But if you're with someone where the relationship is important, where the relationship is going to be ongoing, not just family, but a friend, I absolutely agree with Matt. You know, this is a wonderful opportunity to strengthen that. I respect you, even though we disagree.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about how our brains and our nervous systems work and how this plays into what happens when we get into fights and we kind of lose it when we're arguing about politics. Okay? And this will all be on the quiz at the end of the webinar. So the way the brain is set up is the most primitive parts of the brain are back here. You know, this part of the brain controls breathing and your heart rate and things like that. And as we go further forward, the brain gets more and more sophisticated. Up here, frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, that's where all the higher order thinking comes. Okay? Logic, reason, synthesis, okay? All the good stuff. What happens with our nervous system is we take in information through our sensory organs, and it goes through a part of your brain, which is kind of in the middle, called the amygdala, okay? And one of the things the amygdala does is it does a quick and dirty triage. It just decides, is the information I'm getting threatening or not threatening? If it's not threatening, everything gets routed to, you know, the higher order part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. We examine, we think, we proactively make decisions, okay? We decide what to do, and then we tell our bodies to do it, okay? However, if the amygdala perceives threat, everything changes. It kind of short circuits, and nothing goes to the frontal part of your brain. It goes right back to the motor cortex and telling your body to do something and do it immediately, right away. We go into what they call fight or flight. We get ready either to fight to save ourselves or to run away to save ourselves. If you think of this from like an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense. If I'm a caveman and I'm walking through the jungle and I see a saber-toothed tiger, okay? If I have to stop and think about it, let me see, big teeth, big claws, big sinewy muscles, that looks dangerous, I should run. If I have to go through all that, I'm going to be lunch. I need to perceive that and react right away and run away, okay? That's what helps our species to survive. Part of the issue is we are very social creatures, okay? We can perceive threat not just when it's physical, but also when it's social and emotional, okay? If I feel threatened emotionally, someone's embarrassing me, someone's challenging me, someone's making fun of me, you know, middle school, all over again, okay? When I perceive that, I still go into fight or flight. Fight or flight, there's no higher order thinking. I am just completely reactive to what's going on before me. And I'm going to get defensive and probably aggressive, or I'm going to shut down and run away. Okay? If I perceive something as not a threat, as not embarrassing, then I can think about things and I am more proactive than reactive. Okay? I'm going to choose to do what to do and I'm going to respond as opposed to just reacting.
Okay. So how does that play out in a discussion with family about politics? And how do you go about making sure that the other person doesn't perceive what you're trying to say as something that's threatening or overwhelming?
Well, it plays out and, you know, someone at the table will say something and I feel like it's a threat to me. It's personal. And then I'm going to respond with, oh yeah, of course you would think that. Or, oh yeah, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. As opposed to thinking, in the frontal part of my brain, is that a good idea to say? Is that going to help things? Or is that going to be throwing kerosene on the fire? Okay. So part of what we're talking about with, trying to be able to use this to strengthen the relationship, we're talking about helping each other to emotionally regulate and to not be reactive, to kind of calm things and slow things down.
And how about from kind of an active listening standpoint, Brad? What would you recommend to people to help them make a difficult conversation in a family go more smoothly, so that the other person might be more receptive to what you have to say?
Yeah, it's a great point. I was as David was talking, I was thinking about when I'm in a conversation like that, like my initial response is to like clam up and just be silent. Like, I'm not a confrontational type person, so I'm not typically the aggressor.
Unless we're talking about milkshakes.
Exactly. Right. It's very true. I mean, that I think what we were talking about, it can look like for each person a little bit different what that fight or flight, how it comes across. In terms of what you were talking about, Matt, like listening, I think it comes down to listening, active listening. Hearing the person out, letting them finish their thoughts, and not just jumping in, cutting off, even if you don't agree with them. I think we've all been in conversations where you keep getting interrupted, and that just builds frustration, which then could lead to, just more aggressive behavior. I think something that's also really important, again, because we're focused on family here, we love each other, hopefully, and we care about one another, that there's some sort of positive intent. Everything that we're talking about is coming from a positive place, and that we're not trying to purposely harm or hurt someone else's feelings. I think if you go into a conversation that way, and acknowledge that piece of it, I think it's more apt to be a productive conversation.
I like the way you said it. It's about listening, validating, and acknowledging. If someone's on the opposite side of the spectrum from me, and they start saying, yeah, but there are people on your side that have done this, this, and this. As opposed to saying, no, they don't. It can be helpful to say, you're right, that has happened. That's not typical of everyone on my side, but that's a fair point. That has happened.
Yeah, I also think definitely, is acknowledging that it's everyone has their own experience and perspective. So just because that's not your experience isn't my experience doesn't make it wrong. I think that's a big piece of it as well.
When you talk about active listening, something that I try to teach families is just repeating back what you hear the other person saying. Because a lot of times when we are filtering information through our own political perspective, we don't necessarily hear what they're trying to tell us, or even what they are telling us. So sometimes just by repeating back to them, I hear you saying X, we're going to invite some really good conversation about, oh, well, that might be what I said, but that's not what I meant. Or maybe, no, that's not what I said. That's what you heard through your lens. And that can really lead to more productive conversations than just, yeah, but your side does this.
Yeah, I think often, the first thing I thought about when you said that is how my wife responds to me. So, like I'll say something and she'll repeat back to me what I just said, and I'll be like, that's not what I meant. So I think you're right. Sometimes you say something, you don't quite hear the way it comes across until it's reflected back to you.
One of the mistakes I've made several times is someone is saying something, and I think I understand what they're saying. And then I start thinking about my response, and I'm tuning out the last 2/3 of what they're saying. And it comes across as me not listening, as though I don't care about what the other person's saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, is staying present in those conversations, because I think that's if you do become 2 steps ahead, you know, I think you're not listening anymore, and you could cut off the person, just change the course without, you know, I think you lose respect. You're not being respectful anymore at that point.
Right. I agree.
So it brings up another question, which is, we can repeat something back without necessarily, you know, agreeing with them. I hear you saying this, but how do we listen and validate the other person's perspective if we don't agree with them?
You know, I think David acknowledged that before. Like, there are, you know, the point that someone might make, while you may not agree with it, it could be correct, right? The idea of, you know, you're separating what the person is saying from the policy or issue that you're talking about. So I think that's important, is that, you know, there are correct facts there, correct things that the other person is talking about. So acknowledging that, and not everything is wrong. So I think it's important to, you know, in a productive conversation, to acknowledge a good point that someone else is having. Again, you may not agree with it per se, but I think just the act of acknowledging it shows that you're listening, that you're caring about what they say, and you're not just completely tuning them out.
I guess the other thing is, there are very, very few things that are black and white. People on one side or the other can look at it that way, but very few things are black and white. There are valid, good, solid points on both sides.
Yeah, I think when we...
So go ahead.
There's a bit echo there. I think when we become too rigid, that causes conflict.
Yeah. Expect the other person to make good points. Acknowledge good points. They're going to be more likely to acknowledge your points. You know, sometimes it's even, you know, if you start from, you know, your point of view, where this is this, that makes sense. Remember, I disagree with that starting point, but if you start from there, what you're saying makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I think another thing that can really help is to try not to stereotype people in any particular group as you talk to them.
Right.
So Dave, can you talk a little bit about that and the types of stereotypes that you see come up in families and how you encourage families to work through those?
Well, often we'll kind of use this term, you know, those people. And I hate that term. One, it's almost dismissive. You know, you're one of those people that don't count, that aren't as good, don't matter. It's almost dehumanizing. The other thing it does is it lumps everyone with that view together as though they're, you know, some homogenous group. And nothing could be further from the truth. No 2 Democrats are the same. No 2 Republicans are the same. No 2 Yankee fans are the same. No 2 Red Sox fans are the same. No 2 people who like strawberry milkshakes are the same. But most of the people who like chocolate milkshakes, yeah, we can kind of lump them together.
Got to watch out for those Yankee fans too.
When I went to college, my 2 best friends were diametrically opposed to me when it came to politics. Okay? And they're also brilliant. Okay? By the way, no one ever tell them that. Okay, this is all confidential. And these were really the first 2 people I got to know and kind of started getting into this, where they were making really good points, and they were intelligent points, and they were sophisticated. And that really broke the stereotype I had of all of those people on the other side. You know, finding something, you know, something that disproves, that goes against that stereotype, that's what really helped me to treat people more like individuals as opposed to part of some homogenous, stereotypical, fictional group.
I think another way of saying that is like preventing like the othering of people. So like grouping it that way. You know, I think just having some empathy and not wanting to be put in that position or that group from your side, I think is important to keep in mind. It doesn't feel good when you get lumped into a group that you don't necessarily agree with, or that you don't, it's that spectrum. Not everyone is the same.
I think it's one of the things we really have to be careful of right now in the age of social media, because those algorithms are set up in such a way that the things that are going to come across our news feed are the things that either A, we really agree with, or B, we really disagree with, right? They're not set up in a way to make us go, okay, that's a fair point. They're set up in a way to make us have really strong reactions and trigger that part of our brain and make us come back to the site and keep taking in that information. And so we end up being more likely to become homogenous because of the way those things are set up. And we really have to go out of our way to keep ourselves informed from a more broad perspective.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and not just social media, in the media itself. I mean, if you're just looking at one source of information, it could be such a narrow piece of it that it might be hard to see the bigger picture or all the sides along that spectrum.
Yeah.
Well, and I think when we look at social media and media in general too, we really need to draw the distinction between ideas and people when we're talking to our families, right? That when we're talking with our families, we can talk about ideas, but we're still talking to people with whom we have relationships with.
Right. I mentioned before, I used the phrase, if something feels personal, okay, that's an attack on me as a person. Okay, that starts to feel like a threat. That's when my amygdala starts getting out of control and nothing's going up here. And I start getting defensive. If I make a point and I feel that your reaction is, I as an individual, dumb, stupid, close-minded, poorly educated, don't know what I'm talking about, I get defensive, I feel threatened, and I'm not going to be real nice. If, however, you kind of communicate, no, you are relatively intelligent, almost. Yes, you do have a decent education, but I disagree with your point. I'm a sweetheart. Then I'm very open-minded and I can accept it because it's not personal and it doesn't feel like a threat.
Right. Yeah, and I think avoiding, especially in families, avoiding that threatening tone or words is really one of the most important things. Which brings up another point that, Brad, I'll punt to you, which is you've mentioned a couple times it's okay to disagree, but in family settings, how do you disagree with those things in safe ways?
I think it comes back to like people's experiences, like where is it coming from? Like, why do they have this particular opinion on whatever? I think trying to have a deeper understanding of that instead of just a superficial, like, oh, they have to be wrong because they think that. I think that's part of it. But I think, again, like validating what they have said and that there are some parts that you can agree with. So finding that common ground. It doesn't have to be all wrong or all right. So there's that middle, I think you have to be flexible and willing to compromise. And so that, again, it's about the relationship. So not everything that my brother or whoever said, is talking is wrong. That's just not possible. You have to be able to find some of to validate some of that and just have that, to try to create that connection there so that you are agreeing with something. Otherwise, it's just a wall will be formed and it just won't be a productive conversation.
Right. There's almost a continuum with disagreeing, arguing, fighting. I'm not great with fighting, but disagreeing is okay. If you start with the idea, anyone who disagrees with me is wrong. Anyone who disagrees with me is one of those people. Anyone who disagrees with me is stupid. That's going to cause conflict. If you start with the idea that reasonable people can disagree, well-educated people can disagree, it's okay that that person is disagreeing with me, okay? That changes the whole dynamic. Remember, we're talking about things that very rarely are black or white. And we're talking a little bit about what if you disagree on something that's factual. But a lot of what we're talking about are our opinions, perspectives.
Yeah. And some of those topics are a little harder to discuss than others. So we'll get into some more specific current event type of topics towards the end of the seminar here. But it is important that we try to find those common grounds and find those things that we all agree on, because I think the truth is, especially in families, we don't want people to be dismissed. We don't want people to feel left behind. We don't want people to feel or be hurt.
Does that apply to my sister?
It does. I'll tell her you said that too.
Again, I think like the way you started in the beginning, the disagreeing piece is, it's okay sometimes just to agree to disagree. Like that's an okay resolution. That it doesn't have to always work out, easily. These can be messy conversations, and I think David's going to talk about this a little bit later. That's okay.
Well, let me take it a step further then. How do you respect someone if you don't respect one of their views?
There's a distinction.
Go ahead. No, please go.
There's a distinction between the idea / perspective / view and who the person is. You have incredibly intelligent people in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Okay, you have incredibly intelligent people who are conservative and who are liberal. Okay, I can respect someone's intelligence. I can respect their reasoning, even if I come to different conclusions. Often the difference is not their reasoning or their thought process, it's their starting point, it's the point of view. And that's okay to have different points of view. That's what our country is all about, having different points of view.
Yeah, and it's greater than just one thing, right? A relationship is not just one small thing, such as an opinion. There are other pieces, of someone that you hopefully respect and love and care about, and not just always focus on that one disagreement or difference in values. So I think that's important as well. You can respect all those other pieces about them, and they still could be a great son or a great parent or a great worker, employee, whatever. And I think focusing on those other things and not just being like, oh, he believes in so and so or she believes that. That it's like really narrowing your focus just on one thing, and that kind of dismissing all the other great things about the person.
I always tell my patients, it's okay to disagree with me. I learn more from someone who disagrees with me than I do from someone who already agrees with me. If someone agrees to me, they're just telling me back the same thing that I already know. None of us know everything. And it's good to learn new things.
Yeah, but I think Brad also brings up a really good point that, we all have that friend or family member who has some belief that's out there. They believe in the flying spaghetti monster, and we may not respect that, but we can look at them and we can look at some of maybe the charity work that they do or some of the other things that they support and go, I can respect that. And as a whole, I can respect the person, even if I don't respect this one opinion or this one view that they have.
Well said.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like finding the common goal, shared beliefs between people, right? So you and me could disagree on something, but we, at our cores, we still might believe that we still might want the same thing. We're just coming about it from two different perspectives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And Dave, you brought up a really good point when we started talking about this and brainstorming for it, about how in order to really understand that other person's point of view and help them understand yours, we really need to be careful in the family setting about making sure that we're talking with the other person instead of talking to them. Could you go into that a little bit more?
Sure. When we talk to somebody, the implication is one person's talking and the other's listening, that there's almost a hierarchy and that things are going in one direction. Okay. And most of us don't like being in this position here. Okay. So that's almost inviting, someone to kind of push back against it. If we're talking with somebody, that implies we're on an equal plane, and it's two directional. It's not one directional, it's bi-directional. Okay. Everyone's on an equal footing. Everyone should be equally respected. Okay? And in order to really do that, the big part of talking with somebody is the listening. You have to let them get a word in edgewise.
I think it's especially hard right now when the examples that we see are, whether it's any of the news channels or sometimes even the debates, it is talking to, it's talking at, and I think we have to remind ourselves that there is a time and a place for that. There is a time and a place for debate. There is a time and a place for talking at, but around the Thanksgiving table is not it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think if you're self-aware to the situation, you check in with yourself, like, man, I'm using a lot of airtime. I think if you can see that, then hopefully you can correct that, because the other person's probably feeling like I'm being talked to or talked at. Or the other turn, if you're the receiver, if you feel comfortable, hey, let me try to get in part of this. I would like to share my beliefs too. If I feel like you're just talking to me the whole time, I think that's important to. Again, it's family. Hopefully you feel comfortable, and maybe not always. It's difficult. Maybe there's an ally in the room that can help, get you your airtime or pause the other person so that you can speak.
I agree. I strongly agree. Matt, your example about television, arguing, fighting, that's good TV. That's exciting and fun to watch sometimes. It's almost like tuning into the NASCAR race so that you can see a crash. But that's not what we want in our day-to-day conversations and relationships with our family.
And again, it's one of those areas where I think social media has turned us more towards that, because it's so easy to get on social media and make an anonymous comment that goes out to everybody and not have to worry about the relational blowback from that.
Yeah.
So we've gotten out of practice.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things that goes along with this talking to versus talking with, when we interrupt somebody, that's very clearly saying what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. I can almost guarantee you the other person isn't going to listen when that's how you treat them.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot as we've gone about making sure we resist the temptation to lump one person in with the most extreme of their side. And that was our next question. So I'm going to go ahead and skip past that if you guys don't mind. And the next thing we had on our list is, what do you do or how do you approach it when you believe the other person's facts, the things that are incorrect? So not just their opinions on what to do about it, but their underlying foundational facts of where they come to it. What do you do when you think those are incorrect?
As we said before, I think it's okay to disagree. You don't have to agree with everything, but there is also you should also try to find that common ground. So maybe there's a piece of what they're saying that you could agree upon, instead of just saying, no, everything you're saying is wrong. That's just not true. it's usually based on some sort of truth. So maybe helping them find that piece of truth, that what they're talking about, and focus on that. But I think, if you come across it in a way where you're just confrontive and you're like, everything you're saying is false, it's just going to shut the other person down and you're going to lose the conversation. So I think, again, it's a little bit of a dance there. At the end of the day, you don't have to necessarily agree with everything, but it's how you approach it. Yeah.
And I think the way we phrase it is important. If I start that disagreeing with, you're wrong and you're an idiot, it's not going to go well. Okay? However, if I do things like, I'm not sure if I agree with that, I look at it a little bit differently. That's interesting because what I read actually says this. Okay, it's a little bit softer, and I'm kind of trying to keep the focus on the idea, as opposed to dismissing, belittling, trying to defeat the other person.
Right. Exactly. It's not a competition.
Right.
So there's not a winner. I think that, again, it goes back to the intent of the conversation. What's the purpose of having this conversation? If your purpose is to be victorious, have victory and be the winner, then it's not ever going to go well. If your purpose is to exchange some good dialogue and learn about someone else and their perspective, you're going to have a much more productive conversation. So I agree, not blaming, or making it about the person, learning more about the idea or where they think that came from.
Let me throw a little wrench into this part of the discussion, because we know that there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially as we get closer to the election, especially things that get posted on social media. We know there's a lot of misinformation out there. And Dave, you and I have talked about this personally a little bit, and just seeing how some of the young people in particular that we work with are being targeted with some of this misinformation to sway them more towards one side or the other, and how frustrated we are by that. But we have to be real careful how we approach that, because if they are targeted for a specific reason. They're targeted because it's anticipated they will react in a certain way. And if we put up a wall and say, no, you're an idiot, how could you believe this? It's actually this. Then they're going to react equally as strongly. And we're going to end up losing that very person who we might have been able to make an ally if we tried to understand where they were coming from, or their fears, or other things that are behind it.
I strongly agree with that. And anyone who's been married for any length of time knows there are a lot of things more important than being right. Okay? It's one of the things I always have to remind myself about is I can control myself in what I do. But no matter how right I am, no matter how correct I think I am, no matter what I can do, I cannot control the other person. My goal is not to make them think this, make them admit this, make them do this, or look at it this way. My goal is to respond in a healthy, helpful, good way, but not to try to control them. I get very frustrated when I try to control something that inherently is out of my control.
I think it also goes back to what was our next point, and Brad, I'll punt this one to you, about assigning motives to other people, because when those people are targeted with some of this misinformation, I think sometimes it can twist what might be a really good motive into something that doesn't come out the right way.
Yeah, I mean, only the person who holds those beliefs knows where they're coming from. So to assume something, that's, or to force something upon someone, I think that's where the danger can come in. So I think it takes away from the relationship. Again, putting it back towards a relationship, saying, oh, you must feel this way, or this is because of that. It's again, casting blame. It's taking away from a dialogue and just making it very one directional into more of an argument and then a conversation.
Right, and then it can devolve into Yankees versus Mets.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's not even a real argument these days. You bring up Yankees and Mets. One of my college roommates that I mentioned before came up with this analogy, and I really, really like it, and I wish I had, but I have to give him credit. He talked about not looking at politics like we look at sports, okay? The friend I'm talking about is a big-time Yankee fan, and he hates the Red Sox. And anything that the Red Sox do is bad and evil and wrong. Anything that the Yankees do is wonderful. There was a pitcher on the Red Sox, Roger Clemens. He hated Roger Clemens. He's evil. He's the devil incarnate. Until he got traded to the Yankees, and then he was great. Okay? There was no looking at the content. It's what shirt are you wearing? What team are you on? If you're on my team, you're right. If you're on the other team, you're wrong. Okay? I'm fine with that when we're talking about sports. When it comes to politics, that's actually detrimental. You know, what that means is we're not listening to what the other side says. The other side will typically have some valid points, and they're not going to listen to your valid points unless you listen to and acknowledge their valid points.
Yeah, I think when it kind of what you're talking about is it's much more of a superficial argument or conversation. There's no depth there. That's often like, you know, during the day I work at a school, so with our students, when they report the headlines, you know, something that they've seen on the news and it's really one-sided, and we push back and like, you know, tell us more about that. Why do you feel that way? Where did you get that information from? It stops them because they don't know. They're just reporting. They're echoing something that they heard that's outlandish, and there's no real true understanding of it. So then it creates a conversation. All right, let's talk about this. Let's talk about all the implications here and the history of this topic. So I think that's a really good point, that, you know, just talking about the jersey or the fringes of the topic can be can often lead to more to an argument, because there's no better way of saying it. There's just no depth to the conversation. You're not getting into someone's experience and perspective. You're just trying to push buttons.
It's one thing to repeat the headline. It's another thing to dig into the article, understand what it's coming from, look into the research and how they came to those conclusions.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of the movies I like, there's a good guy and a bad guy. And the whole first half of the movie is about justifying why this one is the bad guy. So we all know that, we all agree on that. When you're discussing this, arguing about this with someone in your family, we're not looking for a good guy and a bad guy. I mean, when we get into it, sometimes we want it to be that, but that's not the goal.
And we might even believe that some of the people on that other side, and I hesitate to even say that based on how we've tried to frame this conversation, right? But we might even believe that the leader of the other party, or some of the leaders of the other party, are bad people. We might believe that, but we got to keep that focus on the person in front of us, right? And we don't believe that brother or sister or cousin or uncle is a bad person, and we've got to take it from that perspective.
I mean, Matt, you referenced this before. Not everyone on the other side is homogenous, and we don't want to treat everyone on the other side as though they are all the extremists from the other side, you know, the outlying 2%.
Yeah, I really like the point you made about like the movie characters, because sometimes, you know, in these movies they'll like make a sequel or another movie about the bad character, and you know, it's about how they're really a victim. You know, it makes it more personal to that character, and you know, it shifts the perspective. So when you're in that person's shoes and build empathy, they're not so bad. They don't seem so bad anymore, because you're really understanding where they're coming from.
All right, so last question before we get into a little bit more kind of nuts and bolts and more specific topics is, what do you do when things just do devolve to kind of the point of no return while you're sitting around in a family discussion?
You try like heck to blame the other person for it. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
You get everyone chocolate milkshake.
Right, exactly. You want to be upfront and open and honest and acknowledge, you know, this isn't going in the right direction. I don't think this is real helpful. You know, I think we're both getting a little frustrated with this, which is okay. Let's take a break for now. It's okay to acknowledge that things aren't going in the right direction. Make it mutual. It's we, as opposed to this is your fault. And it is okay to take a break sometime. That doesn't mean it's taboo and we shouldn't go back to it. We should go back to it just when, you know, we're a little bit more emotionally regulated. Remember that whole fight or flight thing?
Yeah, I think trying to depolarize the conversation, like, you know, saying something like, this is such a complicated topic. Maybe we should revisit it or something like that. So like just trying to bring the tension down.
I agree.
So one thing before we get into more nuts and bolts, I'm going to throw you guys a curveball because we didn't talk about this the other day when we were planning, but as we've been sitting here talking, it's just kind of come to me that, you know, here we are, one straight middle-class white guy moderating this thing with a couple straight middle-class Jewish guys and trying to come to conclusions about how to discuss these things with family and friends. And the truth is, for some people, this is a lot more personal. For some people, they are talking about things where they're really talking about dangerous issues and life and death issues. And I don't care if you're talking about you know, people of color. I don't care if you're talking, you know, specifically about the incident with George Floyd or other episodes. I don't care if you're talking about, you know, police officers and what they do on a day-to-day basis. You know, people have real perspectives, and we see this in our therapy sessions all the time too, where we talk to people who have been through trauma and have been through really, really hard things. And now all of a sudden this academic topic that is, oh, you know, this person's not totally right or this person's not totally wrong, becomes a real life dangerous situation where members of our families can really be triggered into recalling dangerous situations that they've been in, you know, all sorts of messy things that go on in our society, right? And we don't always know about those issues. I don't always know when I'm in a conversation with a friend or a family about some trauma that they might have been through, that they've experienced, or that they've experienced vicariously. And so something I want to put to you guys is, how do we, especially in family settings, right? Again, this is not about debates. This is not about you know, other settings, but especially in family and friend settings. How do we be sensitive to that, understanding we don't have all of the information?
I guess first I want to say, it figures that a chocolate milkshake person would throw a curveball at us. We're all alike. I saw that coming. You know, right at the top of this, we talked a little bit about what are the goals. And one of the goals was to strengthen the relationship, and that is more important than trying to prove somebody wrong. You know, I think what's kind of implied in what you're saying is, sometimes, especially in your family, There are things that are more important. And sometimes it makes sense to not argue the point and to kind of put that aside and to be able to support and show that you care about the other person, that you put the relationship first. Okay? I guess the other thing that comes to mind is I can disagree with a general academic point, but an individual has their own individual specific idiosyncratic experiences. And I can't disagree that they had that experience. And I shouldn't disagree about what their emotional reaction was to that. And I need to validate that. I need to respect that. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to agree, with the other side on the general point, but I do need to acknowledge, validate, and respect another person's experiences.
And I'm so glad you asked that and said it the way you did. I actually have been thinking about that. Who are we to talk about this, in this way? It's not so clean and cut the way we're describing it. This is a best case scenario, and that most often is not the reality. And often we don't know what another person is coming into the room with, and it could be, could be someone's partner that is coming over for the first time who's had a traumatic experience, and the conversation just goes the wrong way and they get triggered. So it's really it's difficult. I think it goes back to positive intent and around the relationships, as David was talking about. So, but you don't always know that. And, it would be great to say, all right, before we have dinner, we're going to lay out some ground rules and guidelines about our conversations. But that's just not, it's just not real. It's not, that's more of like a classroom type setting, around the family table, that dinner table, that's not reality per se. But I think it's on other people listening to the conversation, that if they know, this conversation is going the wrong way, that they are helping facilitate and step in to shift that conversation or to even stop it, because they know that some person might be getting triggered because they know more intimate details about that person. So it is complicated. And, the reason we're talking about this because it happens. It's not, it doesn't just have to be in a year of an election. This is, a conversation that's happening every year, all the time. And I don't think there will ever be a resolution, but it's just an awareness. It's awareness of yourself and awareness of others. And it gets even trickier, especially around the holiday table where people are drinking. They're more apt to say something they may not typically say, or react in a certain way. And so it complicates it even further.
Matt, I like the way you phrased the question. It's not a matter of if this happens, it's going to happen. This is not a once in a 10-year phenomena. This will happen. It's not going to happen every conversation, but it's not really rare.
Right. And I think the other thing that I'd encourage us all to do when we're having these conversations is to take stock, take inventory of the emotions in the conversation. And when you do sense that things are getting out of control, like we said earlier, it's okay to take a break and acknowledge things aren't going well. And it's also okay to say, hey, I can tell you're getting worked up. Is everything okay? Is there something else that's coming up for you? Because again, the goal is relationship building when we're talking in families. The goal needs to be the number one goal. And it's okay to say, are you okay right now? Are there other things going on that you want to talk about that are more important than this particular policy thing that we're talking about? And same as you're monitoring your own emotions. It's okay to go, hey, you know what? This is just bringing up something for me that I don't really want to talk about and I don't want to get into. So can we change the topic? Or if it's someone in your family that you really trust, saying, hey, look, I know we've been talking about this policy thing, but it's brought up this other thing that happened. It's brought up this other experience that I had. Why don't we go into the other room where we've got a little bit more privacy, and let me share that with you, right? And bring up those personal issues, because that's going to deepen the relationship a whole lot more than continuing to argue and pound some policy point.
We can divide people up into, first, I love that point, period. We can divide people up into thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Okay. Thoughts are logical, rational, and to a large extent, we can control our thoughts. Feelings, by definition, are irrational. They are not logical. Okay. I love the New York Mets. There is zero logic in that.
That's for sure.
And, I get into trouble when I try to logic someone out of their feelings. When I try to correct, control, corral their feelings, I can't logic someone out of their feelings. I need to accept and validate those are the feelings.
Yeah.
And I think another piece to this real quick, so I know we're ending, is like the cultural component. And I know you were kind of alluding to this in your question, what you said before, Matt. But every house, every family is going to look different in terms of how these conversations, like the way I grew up, we argued a lot, but it was like healthy, what we thought as healthy arguing. So it just was a lot louder versus my in-laws' house, which was much quieter, but people were still sharing their opinions. It just looked different. So I think from house to house, you have to kind of infuse some of these best practices into what's going to work in your own home.
The other thing I'd say, we talk a lot about how in therapy, if something's important and we miss it, it'll come back up later, right? And the same is true with family stuff. And if we're talking politics with someone and it triggers some emotional response to us because of something we've been through, because of an experience or a friend or whatever, it's okay to come back to that later. And it's okay to go back to that family member and say, hey, look, we got into an argument and I just want you to know where that was coming from. I just want you to know where my emotional response was coming from there. Just when the conversation's over, sometimes, especially when we're talking politics and things get heated, we feel like that's final and that's the end until the next one, right? And sometimes it's actually more effective during those lulls in conversation when we self-analyze and realize what happened to us, to then go back to that family member and go, hey, let's make this personal. Let's talk about the important stuff and forget the politics for a few minutes.
That's such an important point. Yeah. It means so much when the message from the other person is, we disagreed on this, this, and this. But I still respect you. I still accept you. In a family, I still love you. That you can disagree with someone and that doesn't have to ruin the relationship and you're still accepted.
Yeah. We are coming to the end here, but before we wrap up, let me punt it to you, Brad, one last time, I know you took some notes about kind of summarizing some of the more important strategies we can use. So if you don't mind wrapping us up with that.
Yeah, thanks. So using I statements from the I perspective is really important. Taking it slow. Using Dave's NASCAR analogy, this doesn't have to be a race in terms of the conversation. I think slow and steady is usually more productive. Not ganging up. So if there's multiple people at the table and one person has opinion that's not so popular compared to everyone else, not like you're not ganging up on them, but you're trying to shift the conversation to something else so that there's more consensus. Not grouping everyone into those people we talked about. Focusing on the relationship, so not criticizing the person, but if you're focused on the idea or issue that you're talking about, it's not about the person that you're talking to. you're talking with someone, not talking at or to someone. Owning that your own side may have issues, so criticizing the position you're coming from as well, so that you can see both sides. And most importantly, I think just a listening, as we talked a lot about, active listening and acknowledging someone else's, the other person's perspective and where they're coming from. And then I think, again, ending in positive intent. What is the intent of the purpose of the conversation you're having? It's about the relationships with the people around you and getting to know them better.
Okay. We just had a good question in the chat box, which is, how can I help to diffuse an argument about politics between two of my family members? So if you're not part of that conversation, we've mostly tonight been talking about when we're part of the conversation. But when we're that third party, how can we help diffuse an argument?
That's a great question. I think, first it's modeling a lot of the things that Brad said. Okay? When you say you, that's an accusation. It gets people defensive. Someone says, you're a good psychologist to me. My first reaction is, no, I'm not. Don't tell me about me. If you say you're wrong, people have a very different reaction than I disagree. So modeling a lot of the things that Brad said. One of the biggest ones of that, he talked about listening and acknowledging. If you can come in and kind of acknowledge and validate something on each side, that's modeling the right thing. That will also kind of calm and bring things down. Okay? The way we talk is important. When I speed up the way I talk and I can talk about this, I'm going to bring up this point and this point, that'll raise the tension in the room. But if I'm, the third party and I come in and I want to validate this and I want to validate this, it can be helpful to be very aware of the cadence of your voice and to try to go slowly. That'll help to de-escalate things a little bit.
Yeah, and I think if you're listening and you come in and able to maybe summarize what you've heard, like you both made really good points. It made me think about this. And you're kind of pivoting the conversation a little bit. That could be a good strategy as well.
So let me throw this at you, Dave, and put you on the spot. Say Brad and I were having an argument over Thanksgiving dinner, and you were there witnessing it. How would you pull us aside or talk to us to help diffuse that situation?
Well, first, I really like the premise that it's pulling you aside. Okay? Separating can sometimes be a really good idea. And it can be a lot easier to talk with someone one-on-one and help to de-escalate, as opposed to when two people are kind of going back and forth with each other. Right? My goal when I would try to talk with you one-on-one is to get away from the content, away from the thoughts, and focus more on the relationship and the feelings. Okay? Look, I understood what you were trying to say there. And I know this means a lot to you. And I could tell you were getting real frustrated. I don't blame you for getting frustrated. Okay? I think it's good that we took a break. This is really important to you. And I don't blame you for that. Okay? At no point did I say you were right. At no point did I say that I agree with you, because that's not important. I guess the other thing is to try to be real equitable. Whatever I go over and say to one, I need to do the same thing with the other. And be real open and let each know, yeah, this is what I said to the other one, because there's nothing wrong with that.
And maybe helping them find some common ground, in terms of, what I know you're really passionate about this. They're also really passionate about this, and you're passionate about the same thing. You're just coming about it from two different directions.
I guess one of the other things I might do is, and Brad mentioned this, and I really liked it. When I'm talking to the person whose views kind of line up with mine, I might try to criticize my own views a little bit. Look, this is what I think, but I know it's not perfect. I know it's not across the board. You know, I know there are other perspectives, and kind of, you know, I still agree with this. I'm not invalidating that side, but to try to show a little bit of humility and to model for the other person. We're looking for places to agree. We're not trying to win.
Right. And I think, you know, Brad makes a really good point of what's that similarities between the two people. And, you know, even, and Dave, you and I talked about this at the time, back with the 2016 elections, we would talk about how when you boiled down both sides' frustrations, it was, I don't feel heard, I don't feel represented by our government, so I want X person, right? The solutions that they had were wildly different, but the underlying frustration, a lot of times, is very, very similar. And if we as that third party can try to, hey, I hear you're both frustrated. I hear you both don't like what's going on in our country. I hear you both want something better. I hear you, you know, we can help lead that conversation and say, I hear you both want these things and you're both passionate about it, and that's great. This may not be the best time to have this conversation.
Just to kind of back up that point, there's a line from a Bob Dylan song. Yes, I'm dating myself. There's a line from a Bob Dylan song. We all really want the same thing. We just started from a different point of view.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a great place for us to end up here, because I think for the most part, we all do want largely the same things for our country, for our communities. You know, we want to get along. We want to be able to live our lives. We want to be safe. And sometimes we have really different ways about getting there. But hopefully that end goal can be is the same, and we can respect each other as we try to get there. So thank you both for joining me in this conversation tonight. For those of you who were here listening, we really appreciate it. For those of you who are listening after the fact, feel free to put comments or questions, and we'll be following the discussion online. And we will be back next month to talk more about parenting, especially during this COVID time, and helping our kids deal with online or hybrid school and all the frustrations that are coming from that. Thanks
you.
again,
Thank
and
you.
good night.
Thanks, Matt. Good night.